السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum. We should start now. It's 4:01 Pacific time here. If you're joining at a later time, thank you so much for coming on a Saturday at 7 if you're on the Central or East Coast. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. We are truly grateful that you have chosen to spend this time with us, especially during such a heavy and uncertain moment for so many in our community. Today's gathering is called Healing Sudan, and we begin by acknowledging the immense suffering, loss, and displacement that people of Sudan are enduring right now. For many of us, this crisis is not distant or abstract. It is deeply personal. It lives in our families, our memories, and our constant worry for loved ones whose safety we cannot guarantee. We also recognize that ongoing violence, forced displacement, and humanitarian crises take a toll not only on our physical safety, but on mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Fear, grief, anger, helplessness, and exhaustion are natural responses to what is unfolding. If you are feeling any of these today, please know that you are not alone. This healing circle was created as a space of pause, reflection, and collective care. Our purpose today is to ground ourselves in understanding by briefly contextualizing what is happening in Sudan and how we arrived at this moment. To draw strength from faith, history, and resilience, honoring the deep legacy of endurance within the Sudanese people. And to offer tools and reflection that can help us cope with stress, fear, and uncertainty, especially for those supporting families, children, or communities affected by this crisis. We ask that you enter the space with compassion for yourself and for others, and you are welcome to participate in whatever ways you feel safest for you today. Listening quietly, reflecting, or engaging in discussion. We will have a discussion or a Q&A afterwards. You are welcome to stay, inshallah. It is an honor to be gathered with you, and we pray that this time brings you even a small sense of grounding, connection, and relief. Thank you again for being here. Before we begin, I would like to briefly share who is hosting today's gathering. The Healing Circle is convened by Maristan, a non-profit organization rooted in Islamic psychology and dedicated to mental and emotional and spiritual well-being in Muslim communities. Our mission is to offer culturally and religiously tailored mental health services, creating a secure haven for individuals to explore well-being within their faith. We strive to raise awareness about mental health in Muslim communities and beyond, breaking down stigmas and fostering a supportive environment for holistic healing. We offer affordable counseling located in California, which can be Zakat eligible, nationwide suicide response training, psychoeducational programs, and community outreach. We are deeply grateful to be partnered with the Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab, whose research and community-engaged scholarship help bridge academic knowledge with real-world needs. We want to thank them sincerely for their collaboration and for creating the Sudan Community Guide, which informs today's conversation and grounds it in both historical context and mental health understanding. Before we continue, a brief note: the information shared today is intended for educational purposes and community learning. While mental health themes will be discussed, this session does not replace individual therapy or professional care. We encourage everyone to engage in ways that feel safe and supportive for them. With that, it is an honor to introduce today's speakers. Our first speaker is Brother Ma'moon Hassan. Ma'moon Hassan is an award-winning Sudanese filmmaker and storyteller whose work explores decolonization, identity, and resistance. Through film and public dialogue, he centers Sudanese voices and the lived realities of displacement and loss. Our next speaker will be Dania Azawi. Dania Azawi is an associate psychotherapist at Maristan, providing trauma-informed, culturally and spiritually grounded care. She is also a research mentee at the Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab. And with that, I will gladly turn it over to our brother Ma'moon to get us started, inshallah. Thank you.
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده تعالى نستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله تعالى من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. First of all, I want to begin honestly by acknowledging where I am right now. I am located in traditional territories of the indigenous communities of the Anishinaabe peoples. This is the land that is protected by the Dish with the One Spoon agreement. And I want to offer my gratitude to the indigenous peoples who are the original stewards of this land and many of whom live and work in this territory today and who have gracefully allowed us to live amongst them. I want to begin, I guess, really by maybe telling you a little bit about Sudan. I know some of the information that's on the PowerPoints are going to be quite helpful for you, but I may sometimes just kind of sway a little bit from the actual information that's on itself, and maybe I'll talk to you a little bit about what Sudan is to me during this first slide here. And I begin by telling you, I guess, really maybe a story, maybe two, about how I found Sudan to be every time I visited it. Sudan is honestly one of the most beautifulest places I've ever been to. I know its name has been tied to wars and it's been tied to really difficult discussions throughout, but it is genuinely a beautiful place, a fertile land, a land of hospitality, a land of generosity, a land where people give you literally the shirt off their back. The ongoing joke is, around those who know Sudanese people is that don't compliment a Sudanese people on anything he's got on because he'll just take it off and give it to you. And that's, I know it's a joke, but it is a real thing. It's happened to me many times. And you get warned sometimes that, hey, if you ever visit Sudan, don't compliment people on things that they have on or so on because they'll just give it to you. And that's the type of people that they are. Um, there is a documentary on Al Jazeera that talks about Ramadan in Sudan, and I think maybe everybody should kind of Google that and find out about it. But right before iftar in Ramadan, what happens is that households will send their kids and the shabab of the family to go outside and to look for people who are just driving by or walking by, and then basically they literally kidnap them so they can go and have iftar with them. It's not it's not like a nice or a soft space. It is genuinely it's a really violent event where they just force you to come and to have iftar with them. They stop you, they stop the cars and so on. You should watch that documentary. But Sudan is literally home to more than 50 or 500 actually ethnic groups. It's a really, really diverse country. I always refer to Sudan as biggest failures actually as its inability to be able to manage the diversity that should have been a strength rather than a weakness, which turned out to be a weakness. So we'll talk a little bit about this, I guess, as we go on, inshallah ta'ala. Darfur is a really important part of Sudan. It is the latest, really, province that actually joined Sudan. It was annexed by the British in 1916 when they killed their last sultan. And it is also a beautiful space, a space that's really, really rich in resources and so on. And we'll talk a little bit about it a little bit more. I think we can go to the next slide, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah. So let's talk about historical background. So it's- I hate these words conquered and colonized and all of these things, but Sudan was basically, I guess, really controlled by the British just at the moment of weakness of the Ottoman Empire when Egypt kind of, I guess, got a little bit of autonomy uh, under their latest pasha, right? And then they allowed him to kind of, I guess, really be able to also have a little bit of control over Sudan. And interestingly enough, he ruled Sudan as really as a part of Egypt itself, but he allowed for a lot of the Salatin to actually have a little bit of autonomy. One of those Salatin is the Sultan of Al Fashir. He allowed them to do as really as much as they want, as long as they allowed for the British flag to fly, and as long as they actually paid the actual taxes that he needed them to have, right? They don't say we colonized. They say we were it was administered. One of the major issues that have actually happened, and I think it's been the legacy of colonialism, is how they have divided Sudan and how they ruled North and South Sudan. North and South Sudan, just like I said to you earlier, it is such a diverse place, but there is a clear dichotomy between the North and the South in the way people look in the, I guess, the origin of the Kushite, I guess, tribes versus the Nile tribes. So that's kind of how I would kind of, I guess, really separate them, right? They were administered differently. They were looked at differently. The North Sudan was looked at as they're closer in the way that they look to Egyptians. They're closer to the way that Egyptians behave. So the British people kind of allowed them a bit more autonomy. They allowed them a bit more education. And when I say education, I certainly they certainly did not want to give them like the Enlightenment type of education, but it was just education for them to be able to administer things and so on, while they completely denied the southern part of Sudan from any of that. Sudanese people, for instance, from the south would need a permit to go to the north, and similarly from the other side as well, the northern side going to the south. But full independence, alhamdulillah, was actually gained in 56 from the British. This was um, I mean, I don't want to get into too many details in here, but there was a lot of hope at that time, a lot of talk that Sudan itself was going to actually be independent and join Egypt. So Egypt and Sudan would be one country. Hamid al-Azhari actually surprised the British people and the actual Egyptians themselves when he actually announced the independence of Sudan from all of British as their own independent country. I don't know why that guy's picture is there, but I guess he's the one who helped us out in the 2005 comprehensive agreement that was signed between the South and North Sudan. The ever since so Sudan gained independence in 1956. In 1955, actually, is when the first civilian war started between the North and South Sudan. South Sudanese people felt like they were underrepresented. They were. South Sudanese people felt like they were um, like they were not getting a fair share of the resources. They were not. And they also felt like the Northern Sudanese people had a nadra dunia towards them, like they looked down upon them. And that was also true. And that created this very huge rift between the way that Sudanese people have looked at the North and South Sudanese people looked at the North and how North Sudanese people looked at the South. So these wars just came about all of the time. Every time there was a stop for a couple of years, there was three wars, major wars, really, that have actually happened between North and South Sudan. Peace lasted for a lot less than we really wanted it to be until basically 2005, where this comprehensive agreement was signed that led to the secession of South Sudan, which is until today considered the baby land of the United Nations, the youngest land. South Sudanese people are beautiful people. I talk to my wife all the time right now about a relationship with South Sudanese people after we left Sudan, and it is a shame, honestly, that I think that North Sudanese people have not gotten the opportunity to to deal with them and to see them for who they are because of the war. Go to the next one, inshallah. Yeah, Darfur conflict. So this is actually a really important thing for us to talk about Darfur. So in 2003, so the same thing that was high. So I guess I don't know how I can explain this in a way. In any developing country, and you'll see this, mostly cities and lands and provinces and territories that are far away from the center, far away from the capital, usually don't get their fair share of the resources. This is I think it's a trend that we see in a lot of different places. But in Sudan, it was even worse than you can imagine. So Darfur, just like I was going to say to you, the last Sultan of it, Sultan Ali Dinar, he was autonomous, just like I said to you before, until the World War started out. And he decided, because remember at that time, Sudan was ruled by the British Empire. He decided to actually go against the British Empire in that war and to actually join forces with the Ottoman Empire. And that's when he lost that autonomy. Him and 1,000 members of his family were actually bombed and killed in what is known right now as the first time the British Empire has ever used airplanes to kill people in all of Africa. You can look for this. It's actually a really significant event in 1916, and then they basically annexed Darfur and made it a part of Sudan. It is really, really far from the center part of Sudan. And that allowed the Sudanese governments, one after one after one after one, to treat it as really to push it on the peripheral and to kind of not treat them, not to give them their fair share. I'll be honest with you, they did not give them their fair share. Darfur is really, really rich in gold, very, very rich in uranium, very, very rich in al-miyah al-jawfiyah. So, and cattle and all, like it is just such a land that is just so rich that people shouldn't be poor in that land. However, they were, and they were for a long, long time. And there was a lot of movements that actually asked the Sudanese government to actually include them. But because of the war with North and South Sudan, there was not enough attention given to them until 2003, when the Justice and Equality movement actually um, decided to actually take up arm and to fight the government. The government was just really in a sense of just trying to end that war with South Sudan. They didn't have enough army to protect them. They didn't have enough army to send them. So what they did is they did something, just a really terrible thing, which is they basically armed tribal militias from Darfur and allowed them to basically fight these justice and equality movements and what they call Harakat al-Musallaha, right, which is the armed forces, the armed movements rather. And because they're militias, these militias did not behave like armies. They did not behave in any way as really, I guess, disciplined individuals. So what they would do is they would go into these villages, they would gather all the men, they would kill them all, they would rape all the women because that was a way of basically in Sudanese, they say it's considered like they call it kasr al-ain, which is basically to kind of just like show them their place, right? And it was devastating. It was an actual really, really terrible time. If you remember 2003, this was when George Clooney and Angelina Jolie and all these people were talking about Darfur and so on. I'll be really frank with you, at that time, I didn't believe that Sudanese people would do such a thing. There wasn't images coming out of Darfur. Uh, there was a lot of noise coming out of Sudan where they were saying the US just hates us, the UN just hates us. That's why they're saying all of these things about us. But proof has always been given that this type of genocide has been happening, where the Arab tribes that the government of Omar al-Bashir has armed were committing atrocities against the Masalit, against the what we want to consider as African tribes in Sudan. Um, it is a full out, honestly, genocide at this moment because they don't separate between men and women and children and so on. They just killed the whole tribe. And they named them the Janjaweed. They named it Janjaweed because the Janjaweed itself in the local language means men or beasts on horses, just and because that's basically how they came. They came at nighttime on horses. They killed everybody and they just committed all these atrocities. You can go to the next slide, Charlotte. So that's kind of the history of what's happening there. Um, so let's talk about the current crisis, I guess, a little bit, because then we can go back to what's happening. Omar al-Bashir himself, this is the man who ruled with an iron fist, really, Sudan for more than 30 years, since 1989. This was the ruler of Sudan. You can go to the next slide, please. Um, in 2000, in 1989 is when he took power. He he's an army man. He was he belonged, I guess, really to, I don't know how to describe this in a way that makes sense to many of you guys. So he belonged to the Islamic movement, but he was an army man. So he kind of was on both sides of it. He was from the Ikhwan Muslimin. Uh, Again, I don't want you guys to always like mix up between Ikhwan Muslimin of like Egypt and Sudan and so on. They carry the same name sometimes. I think the ideology differs based on where they are, where they're ruling and so on. At any rate, this guy was not a good guy. Uh, like regardless of whether he ruled under Islam or not, he was a terrible person. You know, I I wouldn't believe it if I had heard stories, but I'm a byproduct of how terrible of a person this guy was. My father, for instance, was jailed and was beaten when he came into power. This man, under actually the direction of his second man person who had a personal vendetta with so many people, right? But my dad was not a person who was political. He wasn't anything else. But we were forced basically to leave Sudan and to come to Canada as refugees ourselves. But this story and millions of people like me basically who've left the country because of just the way how Omar al-Bashir himself has actually ruled Sudan until 2019, when honestly, so proudly, the youth of the Sudanese community were able to um, punish him and just kind of get rid of him. This was a complete youth movement. I'm very, very proud of it. Uh, they were able to just basically shut down the whole country and saying to them, unless he leaves, we are not going to work. No university is going to start to work. And because of basically the standstill that happened because of these this revolution, for instance, right? The army itself saw that Omar al-Bashir had to go because everything in the country basically came to a standstill. The army at that time, and you can go to the next slide, the army at that time, unfortunately, was complicit. Like, just like I said to you, it was the one that actually appointed these Janjaweed people. It was after they made these Janjaweed people, and Janjaweed became a real, very effective at protecting the western side of Sudan from all of these I guess movements. What had happened is that he gave him a new name. He gave him the Rapid Support Forces. This is what the RSF stands for. But he wouldn't allow them to serve as a part of the army. So there was an army that is separate from the army. And I think that's the biggest mistake that he's done, because the moment he's done this, he now allowed them not to serve under the army command. They actually belonged to him. He was the only one who can actually tell them what to do. And they turned on him. So when the whole country basically wanted to get rid of him, the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, which again, those were the Janjaweed before, now said, okay, fine, we're going to actually gang up with the army and remove this man from power, effectively basically making the country ruled by two different armies, or have two different armies within one country. They were really, really powerful. They had fought in the Yemeni war with the under the coalition, so they had a lot of experience. They were also getting paid huge money by the EU to actually protect the Sahara area from having Africans basically travel over to the to Europe during remember, if you remember all of these times when Africans were just fleeing Africa and just traveling through the Mediterranean to get into these boats, the Rapid Support Forces were getting paid crazy money to be that army to shut it down, and they were really, really effective. And because the army, nobody had enough money to pay these guys, they allowed them to basically take control of the actual natural resources. One of the major ones there is Jabal Amir, which is a mountain in Sudan that is just crazy amount of gold, where he's able to basically been able to export it independently by himself to the United Arab Emirates, to Saudi Arabia, and to many different countries. Again, I'm mentioning these names, guys, and I'm genuinely just, I don't want to make it political, but war is political. So if I mention anything, it is honestly an opinion of mine. It's not to do anything with the Stanford with really Maristan. So just so you guys know, okay. Um, but now like, these two armies that were in Sudan had to come up with a solution of how they're going to operate together in one country because the Sudanese people just wouldn't allow them to be two different armies. We insisted as a Sudanese people that we want them to become one and we want the actual ruling to be civilian. We no longer want to go back to the actual army controlled country. The Fatah al-Burhan, who is the general of the Sudanese armed forces, this is the original armed forces, decided that he wanted them to be amalgamated into one forces within 2 years. Hemeti, the RSF, the Janjaweed, they said they needed 10 years. This is the main point of contention here. Um, Obviously, Hemeti is a very ambitious guy. He did not really think that, I mean, mind you, he's not an educated guy. He doesn't have, he's not even a high school graduate, but he's really, really charismatic. He's very, very smart. He knew how to come up with a huge amount of money and a huge army to belong to him. And the moment you say to him, now you have to belong to a bigger army, and that you have to take orders from somebody who's higher ranking than you are, that's not something that he wanted to do. And that's basically how the war itself started out. Um, and I wanted you to read over like all of these events because I do want to talk about Darfur. But there was a lot of atrocities that have been committed in Sudan since April 15th of 2023. There's crazy things have happened. By the way, by both sides. I know Sudanese people don't like it when I say that. I get called out on it a lot of times, but the army is not innocent either of atrocities against humans and human rights. The army, we just have a better hope that the army as an institution can be held accountable, that the army as an institution has, it has judicial oversight, uh, uh, it has a military police, it has all of these things that we're just hopeful after this army, after the war is done, that we say, yeah, you know what, the army can actually catch its officers and judge them and put those who committed these atrocities to jail, while we don't have these kinds of hopes at all from the militias at all, right? And that's how it came about, that now almost 90% of the Sudanese people are actually with the army. Don't mistake that for the fact that they want them politically, but it's just at this point, it is the only institution that is operational in Sudan. There is no judicial institution, there is no political institution. There is nothing. It's just the army right now that's actually running things, and our hopes, honestly, is that they're going to be able to manage this. So I think I talked about Darfur. Darfur's always been, just like I said to you, the western part of Sudan. The Janjaweed, that's their homeland. The Janjaweed mostly are Arab tribes. I really need to make this clear, actually, though, because this whole dichotomy of Arab versus African Sudan is such a strange thing. It's a very strange dichotomy because uh, I don't know. I guess maybe I'll ask some people. I know I usually like to have feedback when I'm doing these talks, but if you see me, would you consider me an Arab or not? It's usually always a funny question to ask in Sudan because Arabs, when they come to Sudan, they're like, well, how do we know who's an Arab and who's not? And you can't, you don't know. Darker skin does not mean that you're non-Arab, and lighter skin does actually not mean that you're an Arab in Sudan at all. It is a very, very weird country. My wife comes from the northern part of Sudan. That's the Nubians of Sudan. These are non-Arabs, but they are lighter skin. They have their own language that they speak in their homes. Um, I come from a tribe where we don't have another language to speak. Traditionally, we've never ever had another language to speak besides Arabic, so therefore we are considered as Arabs. So that's kind of how Arabs versus Africans are looked at in Sudan, right? So when I say the Janjaweed are mostly Arabs, it doesn't mean that the darker skin or lighter skin, you wouldn't know. For instance, you can see, for instance, the RSF, the many of them are very, very dark skin, and many of them are actually very light skin, and so on, but you wouldn't know whose tribes they're from. And also tribes in Sudan are very strange. If a member of a tribe marries from a different tribe, there's his sons immediately become from his tribe and not the woman's tribe, just how Arabs do things. So now, for instance, I'm an Arab, considering this, right? My wife is not. When my children even know, they spent more time with their mother's side, right? But they're not from their tribe. They're now a part of my tribe and they become Arab. So this is kind of how strange things are, because I really hate it when the Western media says, oh, it's an Arabs versus Africans or so on and so forth. There is that dichotomy, but it is not based on look. It is based on just really Jahiliyyah business. Honest, to be very frank with you, it is just really a Jahiliyyah business, and the Prophet ﷺ would describe it as, as a Jahiliyyah, really, in a sense. So that's kind of how it is, right? But now, because the armed forces did come from tribes that were considered Africans and Masalit and so on, right? Again, just like I said to you, if a man from Masalit married from somebody from Arab, his kids would become that. So they wouldn't know, but you'd know them from the names, from their last names, from where they're from, and so on and so forth, right? The RSF now, when they're actually putting Darfur under siege, they really, really thought that the Masalit and all these people that they used to fight before, they had all this hatred for them. And the moment, uh, um, uh, Al-Fashir and Darfur, for instance, was open up for them, they just unleashed a crazy, no, like it's so I'll give you some of these numbers. Al-Fashir was, for instance, taken over by the RSF on the 27th, 28th of October. Within 48 hours, they were able to kill 2,000 people, 2,000 men. I have some of my team members, for instance, who have sent me some horrific videos of rape, of infants, all the way to like grandmothers. And again, it's not a sexual pleasure. It is an actual point, a political point to do this. I know that African wars is just known for these kinds of really terrible sexual atrocities. It's quite unfortunate, and Sudan is no stranger to that either, right? There is a testimony that happened in the British Parliament that talks about just from the 28th of October until now, there's more than 60,000 people who have actually been killed in Al Fashir. The Yale humanitarian, I'm certain you've seen this before, but they showed some images from the satellite, basically, where it shows discoloration on the ground and pool of blood. And just basically they analyze the actual movements within El Fashid itself, and basically the numbers are horrific. The numbers are horrific from what they're actually seeing. The next slide, please. Yeah, I do want to talk about this a little bit here. I know we refer to it as a civil war, but there's no civil war in the world that's not supported by external factors, right? It's just so you know, the UAE is quite complicit in actually funding the RSF. The RSF is a militia. That's why all Sudanese people are just hating on the United Arab Emirates at this moment here. Again, I want to be really honest and frank with you. I worked in Abu Dhabi for some time. I've never been disrespected by an Emirati person. This is not at all what we're trying to do here. But what we're saying is that their government is complicit. There's many, many reports that actually say um, that that the UAE is complicit. It's complicit. It's got a huge deep pocket. It is selling Sudanese gold by the tons, and it's benefiting. It's benefiting because, again, just like I said to you, and I guess really I can explain for why the UAE is specifically is has a problem in Sudan. UAE has a problem with any government that claims it's Islamic. It has that problem. You can see it in the way that Libya has been dealt with. You see it in the way that the Ikhwan Muslimin have been dealt with in Egypt, in Syria, for instance, even the way that it looks at Hamas and the PLO right now in Palestine. They have this ideology, the anti-Islam ideology. And just like I said to you, the army of Sudan has been ruled by this man who was considered an Islamist. So therefore, to them, the RSF is a better option than the armed forces. Go to the next one, inshallah. Yeah. Um, so this is actually a a slide that I don't want to say I insisted, but I suggested to have because I think it's really important for us to have this talk about this. The war in Sudan started before the war in Gaza. And this is not the moment to honestly to compare atrocities. I don't think it's appropriate to do that, but it is. I do it regardless because I think it's important for you to understand how come the Sudanese people are feeling a ways about the Muslim community overall. And we feel like honestly we feel excluded. Like I'm one of the people who have offered everyone resources on how to look at Sudan and how to educate the community on Sudan, and I've been turned down. I have given personal offers to nonprofit organizations and charity organizations to say to them, listen, I have footage that's coming from the ground that helps you guys in understanding what's happening. We need the support, we need the help. And we didn't get anything else. And then when the war started in Gaza, we just saw that it wasn't a lack of ability. It wasn't, it was just a lack of political will. The Sudanese, the community um, is not happy. It's just literally not happy because we think of ourselves as darker skinned Muslims that we've been receiving less attention. We've been receiving fewer donations and honestly just zero advocacy. I know here the word says weak advocacy, but it's been zero advocacy at all, right? So that's externally with the actual out the rest of the Muslim community. But even internally, this fight, this wars in Sudan has created such a terrible, terrible like waves of rhetoric between us as Sudanese people, how we are looked at, and how we look at each other. Racism is just rampant. There is no forgiveness between the two of us. We don't know how to move forward. And it is a real, real issue for us. Okay, so I guess this is your hint that I should move a little bit faster. All right, the Sudanese humanitarian crisis. Again, let's talk about more than I know. I hate saying numbers. I hate saying numbers because honestly, numbers are meaningless. Numbers don't cry. Numbers don't bury children. Numbers don't do any of these things, but they're important for you to understand the context, right? So 150,000 people have been killed since the beginning of the war. It is the largest and saddest story on the face of the earth right now. More than 14 million people have been displaced. There's 14 million people who've lost homes. Sudanese people go and work abroad for sometimes 20, 30 years to come and build a home so they can come back home and retire to it. I have three uncles who've retired from working in Saudi Arabia for the past 30 years to basically the same year that the war actually started after they built homes and just to retire, and now they are no longer there. And sadly enough, they're dependent on their children to send them like $100 a month, so on and so forth. It's a really, really difficult thing. 17,000 school-age children. It is the largest education shutdown on the face of the earth. I don't know how I can say these words in any way that makes sense anymore. They're just honestly, to me, I've said them so many times, they're just words to me. But this is a lost generation. This generation will never, ever, as a generation, not will never be productive again. I'm not optimistic at all. They're just done. We don't have the capacity in Sudan to deal with the mental devastation that has been caused by the raping, by the killing. We don't have the judicial capacity to actually even go after those who have committed all these crimes. We don't know what truth and reconciliation is going to look like.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Ma'moon. I that was incredibly impactful. I feel like I'm still processing it. And I just really want to thank you for rooting us in the historical and political context of everything that's happening. Um, and for even sharing your own personal stories of how you did and how, you know, I think it's impossible to understand the human impact of this without having this context. So I really want to thank you for sharing that. Um, and inshallah, I will be going over some of the mental health impact of everything that has been going on. Um, the goal of this is to just provide some overview of what the mental health side of things looks like, both in Sudan, in the diaspora, and among our communities. Um, the idea here is that when people are living through ongoing violence and genocide and displacement, that they're constantly in a state of survival mode. And what we want to shed light on is what that looks like. It's not about weakness, it's about what happens with a prolonged exposure to fear and violence and instability, that trauma that can come from that. And inshallah, it's also important to talk about the strength and resilience of the communities in Sudan and in the diaspora. Um, Before we move forward, though, I do want to note that's okay, we can jump to the next one too. But there are a few slides here that talk about the impact of trauma, of sexual violence, of the impacts of violence on children. And so if any of these topics are sensitive to you, then I would invite you to take the time that you need, take the space that you need to look after yourself, inshallah, however it is that you need to. So over here, we're looking at violence and psychological harm. I'm also not much of a fan of numbers and statistics. Sometimes they don't, after hearing so much, sometimes it just doesn't it's hard to resonate with. But the idea is that trauma doesn't just look like depression and anxiety. And here we can see how it can show up physically as chronic pain, issues with your health, getting sick over and over for long periods of time. And so when you see higher rates of depression, PTSD, anxiety, and things like that, that could signal that people's systems, people's bodies and minds are being pushed beyond what they were meant to carry. And that's the main idea behind some of this here. If we can go to the next slide. The effects of war and displacement, like Brother Ma'moon said, 14 million. I know we have 10 million here, but well, 14, we're trusting the more accurate numbers here. That being displaced and going through displacement is not just about losing your home. There's a loss on multiple levels. There's loss of family, loss of community, loss of safety, routine, identity. There's so much that you lose, and then so much that is uncertain, such as, living with constant worry about where you're going to get food from, how you're going to find the right healthcare. When you have militias and groups restricting, controlling humanitarian aid, it's important to realize that uncertainty has significant impacts on mental health. And that's something that you can see on the ground as well. I also do want to note that, a lot of the numbers and percentages and things that we might see it's very likely that it's underreported, that sometimes there isn't the right infrastructure to even get accurate numbers. But we can move on to the next slide. So Brother Matmoon mentioned how there is a system collapse, a system to address health overall, and mental health in this case was already something that was underfunded, pre-war, centralized, meaning sometimes you would find them mainly in just like big cities, or they weren't as widespread. So even if you're not in a case of conflict, or if you're not living through that, that is already hard to find. So when you have these added challenges, then all of a sudden the system just collapses, coupled with a strong stigma for mental health. It makes things more difficult, people not getting the care that they need, delaying their care, or preferring spiritual care, which there's nothing wrong with spiritual care, but the idea is that things go hand in hand. And when you don't have the infrastructure, then a lot of these issues go unaddressed. And we can move on to the next one. So here, I want to take a pause here. Everything about what we're hearing is so incredibly devastating. And I want to give voice to that, especially, learning about how sexual violence is used as a weapon against the people, against communities, against women. And it's not something that's random. Is something that is used deliberately. And hearing about this is very heavy, and that reaction is very real. It's not easy to hear about some of these things, but it is important to acknowledge them. And without going into graphic details, we just want to name it. And we want to look at how different forms of violence wounds and impacts communities overall. We can move on to the next one, Sean. So we learned about racial violence, race-based violence. And racial violence does cause anxiety and stress. Not only does it do that, but it also creates a collective wound. When violence targets who you are and what you look like, what your ethnicity is, or the color of your skin is, that creates a different layer of trauma. And that is something that we see here, and that Brother Matmoon also had touched on earlier. So it's important to give light to that as well. Now, the layers that impact, kind of touching on the different layers of community, or the different parts of Sudan that are impacted, and children and youth are a major group here. This is extremely significant. We all know children and youth are the future of, communities and society and all of that. So the idea here is these increased rates of PTSD, of depression, of anxiety, malnourishment, physical harm, physical struggles and challenges as well. Children don't have the language to explain some of these things, but they do feel it. Their bodies remember it. It's not just their childhood that's affected. It's a lot of their emotional regulation, their learning, what their mental health looks like across their life, is all significantly impacted. So when talking about what the future looks like, we want to pay attention to what the youth and the children are going through as well. So I know a lot of this is heavy. It's hard to talk about, honestly. It does not feel good to, but it is important. And I think it is also important to say that although suffering exists, that does not mean that resilience and strength is not also present. So we do want to shed light on what that looks like as well. You can go to the next slides. So grassroots resilience in Sudan, even in the midst of extreme violence, system collapse, and genocide, Sudanese communities have been organizing, trying to take care of each other, finding ways to survive. Young volunteers creating emergency response rooms, community members stepping in to help operate hospitals or, medical relief. Rural families opening homes, people taking care of each other, offering safety to one another. And not because they had more, not because they had extra, but because they're not going through things alone. They're going through it together. And this is an example of what resilience in a very real way can look like on the ground. And if we're talking about, we want to touch on the Sudanese community and the diaspora not living there. Survival's guilt is a really big thing here. A lot, and it's a natural feeling that comes up, feeling bad for being physically safe while you're emotionally connected to people who aren't. And you don't even have to be Sudanese to feel this. I mean, we're Muslim and we feel that pain when we see our ummah going through things and struggling and suffering. So that survival's guilt, it comes from a place of love. And what we see within the diaspora or within communities who are looking for increased strength and healing is that it happens through dialogue. It happens through easing that powerlessness, talking to one another, allowing ourselves to seek support and supporting one another through it as well, so that we can do what we can for our sisters and brothers. So this expands on it a little bit more about what collective healing and what diaspora mental health looks like, aka Sudanese people living outside of Sudan, and also just the Muslim community overall. What does collective healing look like? What does looking after one another mean? And that for a lot of people includes activism. It includes engaging in dialogue, raising awareness, maintaining cultural identity through storytelling like Brother Mamoun does, and talking about the mental health challenges of, being all the way here and feeling like, how is it them and not us? It could have easily been us. And that feeling is very natural. It's real. And, seeking community and connection is a way that a lot of people cope through community organizing and through staying connected with one another. It's not just about activism or, being political about things, but they are also mental health strategies. They are things that can help promote our mental health. So vicarious trauma, this is something that I thought was important to touch on, that it happens when an individual is affected by witnessing the traumatization of others. So I really wanted to name this because this is something that many of us could be experiencing, even if we haven't been to Sudan, even if we're not Sudanese ourselves. But it is also especially common for people who are deeply connected to Sudan. So family members, advocates, organizers, community leaders, clinicians, whatever the case may be. It's the stronger you feel like that emotional connection is to, you may feel impacted by the trauma that you witness. And this is an extremely natural response that we feel, especially as Muslims. when we feel and we see the suffering of our ummah. We have community and connection as like one of the main things in our religion that we learn, in our communities that we grow up with. And so when we see our people suffering, then we feel it too. And that can show up in our lives, in our day-to-day. And sometimes it can be really debilitating. So sometimes you could feel really pessimistic about the world, or struggle with like feeling a loss of hope, or finding it hard to concentrate on things, feeling irritable. These are like real symptoms of vicarious trauma that maybe you've experienced, maybe you know someone who's experienced it. So it's important here that we know what it is that we may be feeling, so that we can find ways to strengthen ourselves and to strengthen our communities. Strategies here look like self-care, social support, being connected, like I've emphasized in previous slides, and checking in with your community, checking in with your Sudanese community members, your friends, your family, so that we are not just overwhelmed with the feelings of guilt, but that we can strengthen ourselves enough to channel our love for our ummah into action. So we know that, you know, in Islam, suffering is not something that we explain away or we deny. It's something that we try to derive meaning from, and connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and closeness to Him through it. That even if we don't understand the reasons of why, if we don't know what the reasons are, we're seeing so much suffering and we can't explain it, but we know that our Lord is the most wise, the most merciful, and that His wisdom is beyond our capacity to understand. Islam emphasizes responding with patience, remembrance, and trusting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. It's not about pretending that things are okay, but knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees and knows everything, and that we can always turn to Him. So dua, qunut, and prophetic response. So at the very least, what we can do is we can make dua, and we can turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, prayer and sujood, and knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears all, He knows what's in our hearts, and that we turn to Him and understand the power of turning to Him. We know that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray qunut during times of collective hardship or need. This was the special supplication that's standing in the last rak'ah of your prayer. And this is like the Prophet ﷺ, like the person we look to, for example, on how to live and how to be. So taking example from that and making dua and turning to Allah and looking inward as well is really important. And here I like the point about making dua by name for people. So naming the oppressors, naming those who are suffering, naming the oppressed, and making dua also in your own language is something that can help you feel more connected. It's naming the harm is part of the care, and I love that there's the hadith about naming when you're making dua as well, to add more meaning to it and more depth. And lastly, there's a specific dua here that people pray. So this is talking about prayer, especially in the night. And it says, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan wal-ajzi wal-kasal wal-bukhli wal-jubni wa dala'ad dayni wa ghalabat al-rijal. That this dua is to turn to Allah and strengthen our own emotional resilience, our own ability to, our own capacity to take everything in. That we seek refuge in Allah for being overwhelmed by feelings of grief, by feelings of worry, that we're not debilitated by it, but that we can take action and that we can take steps and brothers in Sudan. And that taking steps, not just from a religious perspective, but also a mental health perspective, and taking action is healing. So inshallah, that is something. If you guys want to screenshot this or keep it. It's also, I mean, a powerful one to strengthen our own emotional resilience so that we can keep going, inshallah, and staying connected. And inshallah, being able to take action together as a community. I'll pass it back to Sister Maryam, inshallah.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. Both of you did an amazing job. I know more about Sudan now than I did before. Lastly, we will have a call to action. So part of healing is also raising awareness and feeling connected with the community. Support relief efforts. So like Brother Ma'moon said, there is sadly not a lot of support or relief or funding going towards Sudan. So please look out for Sudanese community. There is the Sudanese American Physician Association. They are a reliable source that you can go to and support. There is a code right here that you can take a picture of as well. So I'll leave it up there for a second. Thank you. Other resources for the community, there is, of course, Maristan. There's Khalil Center as well. Nasiha, which is 24/7 hotline, and Ruh Care. I believe they're all online, right? Yeah, they are. I just want to make sure. Other resources for mental health care, Institute for Muslim Mental Health, and Amali. I hope I'm saying that right. Am I saying that right, Dania? Okay. And there are codes as well. Learn more about Maristan at our website, maristan.org, and you can also receive monthly newsletters if you would like to. That's our link. You can also join via our website. All this information that was given to you today is all located in a I wouldn't say handbook, a guidebook, and there's the code right there that the Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab created for you guys to go through. It goes more in depth, and you can open it anytime. It's a free resource, inshallah. And lastly, just a big thank you for Dr. Rania, who is our co-founder, and a big thank you again for the Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab.